a part of the brain, part of the reptile brain, has been changing. Now we're actually at a particular point where we are going back to its original design of what we're supposed to be designed to be, instead of programmed to with what we have been in the past. So if we look at Egypt, if we look at there's been more slavery, more tragedy in our history than you can possibly imagine. I mean, people have these fantasies of saying, oh, well, I lived in the 16th century and I was a prima donna. Well, good luck. Because if you were a prima donna in the 16th century, by the time you were 20, that's it, you're gone. You probably were dismissed. So we have these fantasies human beings were continuously exposed of, and were used as slaves and slavery. That's how these kings and royalties have succeeded in what they gained. It doesn't matter if you look at the Mayans, it doesn't matter if you look at the royal family in England, or you look at the Sikhs, it's all the same. It's all human slavery. So now we're at this particular point, we're freeing ourselves from slavery. So we're actually talking about, so I'm not my emotions are there to identify. We are actually utilizing how we process information, how we think differently, even from the 80s to the 90s. We are processing how we're thinking and how we look at things completely differently. So when we talked about in meditation, there are these counterparts. So the process of karma has been a slow process. In Egypt, if you were in your 30s, you were considered an old woman. Children usually were born, or mothers would give birth to children when they were 12, 13, that period of time. By the time they were 30, 40, you were an old person, you would die. So even our life expectancy has changed dramatically from where we started from compared to where we are today. We're no longer looking at midlife, that we're, what was that called? Not a midlife crisis. Midlife. Usually around 40. Now we're looking at 50 and 60. We're living so much longer, and the latter parts of our lives are filled with so much more awareness and consciousness than ever before. So this morning when I spoke about these counterparts, there are other counterparts that are in that wheel of karma, even if you don't understand it right now. We're going to get there. That simultaneously is trying to get off this wheel, that is developing the same, or is trying to develop the same awareness, but you are the one that is leading ahead of all the other counterparts. I don't know if that all makes sense to you, but in time, as we go throughout this week, it will make sense. And so what she's just read is that in this wheel of karma, or in this forest, we might not be alone. She's not saying that, but it says we need to keep going through this wheel of karma, and we need to go through a very slow process. With other words, 40, 50 years of the same, I'm sorry to say that, but for the same shit for 40 or 50 years was normal, where now a day of not being in touch with ourselves isn't good enough anymore. That's how evolved, that's how far along we are getting. Now, some people just continue the same behavior. So, with other words, have we changed? Is that just based upon materialism or money or power? Or are we no longer wanting to suffer the way that we've needed to suffer in order to have gotten it? So, with other words, we needed to suffer from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime to lifetime because that's how we learn. It's the only way we learn. But could it be that we have changed and that we're tired of the suffering part, and that we are reaching a higher level of consciousness that says, you know what, I get it much faster and much quicker. I don't need to be dragged down to the bottom of the ocean, then ripped apart before I can get it. I don't need to be thrown in a dungeon of a castle, or be burned at the stake, or be beheaded. I don't need that. I get it. Does everybody understand that? So we are changing more rapidly and more quickly because this entire perception of the only way that we evolve, which is through suffering, we are getting enough of suffering ourselves. It's like this whole thing, like get over it. And I'm not just saying get over it, but we as individuals are saying this is too long, too tiresome. We don't need to do the same thing. We can actually get it more quickly, more able. We don't need to go through the depths of what we've done in the past. And that's why yesterday when we watched this video that said our first response is as of a 2-year-old. How do you break karma if our first initial response is as of a 2-year-old? It's a real contradictory, because the brain that says this 2-year-old behaves, and how you're supposed to end suffering by making or by being aware that emotions are there to guide us and tell us a canvas and paint a canvas, but it isn't our identity. And our first reaction will be that 2-year-old. And if we make that connection, along with we don't need to suffer as long as we have, then we start breaking and entering into new fields of consciousness.